The call came at 6:47 in the morning, and Kwesi Abara almost didn't answer it. He was already in the elevator of the Harrington Grand, pushing a cart stacked with fresh linens, his ID badge clipped to the front pocket of his gray uniform. He'd been on shift since 4. He had 3 more floors to cover before the morning rush, and his phone buzzing in his pocket was the last thing he needed. But he glanced at the screen, his supervisor, Paulette, and picked up. "There's a situation on 14, she said. "Mrs. Harrington wants security and housekeeping, both up there, now." He already knew it wasn't good. Diane Harrington didn't ask for things. She summoned them. Kwesi had worked at the Harrington Grand for 6 years. He'd started as a porter at 23, fresh out of a 2-year contract with a private security firm in Brampton. Before that, a stint with the Ontario Provincial Police as a civilian forensic technician. A job he'd left quietly, for reasons he didn't discuss with coworkers. He was 31 now, lead housekeeping supervisor on the morning rotation, known among the staff for his calm, for his memory, and for the fact that he never ever raised his voice. The Harrington Grand was one of those Ottawa hotels that wasn't really a hotel anymore. It was a permanent address for people who could afford to live that way. 3 floors were reserved for long-term residents, families with old money, who kept suites year-round and expected the staff to behave accordingly. Diane Harrington was not the hotel's owner. She was something more complicated than that. She was the widow of the man whose grandfather had sold the building in 1974, and she lived in Suite 1401, as though the transaction had never happened. The staff called her Mrs. Harrington to her face. Behind her back, they used other words. When Kwesi stepped off the elevator on 14, the hallway was already crowded in the way that meant something had gone wrong and everyone was pretending otherwise. A uniformed officer stood near the door of 1401. Paulette was there, arms crossed, face unreadable, and standing just outside the door, in the particular posture of someone who had spent years practicing the art of being visibly wronged, was Diane Harrington herself. She was in her late 60s, dressed at 7 in the morning in a silk blouse and pressed trousers, her white hair pinned in a way that looked effortless and cost significant money to maintain. She had the particular face of someone who had never been told no without eventually finding a way around it. She looked at Kwesi the moment he stepped off the elevator. Not at Paulette, not at the officer, at Kwesi. "That's him," she said. The officer turned. Paulette's chin dropped slightly. Kwesi pushed the linen cart to the side of the hallway and stood still. He didn't ask what he'd done. He already understood this wasn't a conversation. The story, as Diane Harrington told it to the officer, and then, louder, to the hallway, was this. Her bracelet was missing. A diamond tennis bracelet, the kind with 38 stones, given to her by her late husband on their 40th anniversary. She had worn it to dinner in the hotel restaurant the previous evening. She had returned to her suite at 10:15. She had set the bracelet on the vanity in the bedroom, and when she woke this morning, it was not there. She had, she explained, reviewed the electronic entry log for her suite. 2 key cards had been used after 10:15. One was hers, one was a housekeeping master, logged at 11:40, for what was recorded as a scheduled turndown service. Kwesi had been the one to carry out the turndown on 14 that night. "He was in my room," Mrs. Harrington said, "alone, for 11 minutes. The officer, Constable Lavoie, young, conscientious, clearly uncomfortable, wrote this in his notebook. He looked at Kwesi. "Sir, is that accurate? Were you in Suite 1401 last evening?" "Yes," Kwesi said. "And can you tell me what you did during that visit?" Kwesi listed the items. Fresh towels on the bathroom rack, water glasses replaced, blackout curtains drawn, the bedside lamp adjusted per the resident's standing preference note. He spoke evenly, in the same tone he used when reviewing shift schedules. Mrs. Harrington made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He's very practiced," she said to no one in particular. "They always are." Paulette said her name. Mrs. Harrington didn't blink. "I want his locker searched," she said. "I want his bag searched. I want to know where my bracelet is." Kwesi looked at the constable. "I don't consent to a search," he said, "of my locker, my bag, or my person." The hallway went quiet in the particular way of a room where several people suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be. Paulette looked at the floor. Mrs. Harrington's expression shifted. Something behind her eyes tightened. She turned to the constable as though Kwesi had said something obscene. "Can he do that?" she asked. "Yes," Constable Lavoie said. He can. That morning, Diane Harrington called the hotel's general manager, Mitchell Perret, at his home. Then she called the property management company. Then, based on remarks she made loudly to her assistant in the corridor near the lobby, she made it understood that she was considering whether the Harrington Grand was still the kind of establishment she could continue to recommend to her acquaintances. Perret arrived by 9. He was a trim man in his mid-50s who wore good suits and believed deeply in the power of de-escalation. He met with Mrs. Harrington in the restaurant with the door half closed and a pot of Darjeeling on the table, and emerged 40 minutes later, looking like someone who had been asked to choose between 2 headaches. He found Kwesi in the staff room. "We'd like to suspend your access to the residential floors while we look into this," he said. "Paid administrative leave, starting today. It's standard procedure." Kwesi looked at him. "Is this because of the entry log?" he said. "Or because she asked you to?" Perret straightened his jacket. "It's standard procedure." Kwesi picked up his bag. "I'll need that in writing," he said, "by end of day." He went home to his apartment in Vanier, a clean, quiet 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building he'd lived in for 4 years. He made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table. He opened his laptop. What Kwesi had not told Constable Lavoie, what he had not told Paulette or Perret or anyone at the Harrington Grand in the 6 years he'd worked there, was that before the security firm in Brampton, before the OPP, he had spent 3 years working as a licensed insurance investigator under a senior adjuster named George Faulkner, who had taught him 2 things above all others: document everything before you need it, and never assume the missing thing went where everyone says it went. He had documented the turn-down service on Suite 1401 the previous evening. He did this for every suite he serviced. A habit so old he didn't think about it anymore. A voice memo on his phone recorded the moment he stepped out of the room, listing what he had done, what he had seen, and what had been where. It took 40 seconds. He had done it 11,000 times. He opened the recording from the night before. Towels replaced, bathroom, 2 sets, water glasses 2. Curtains drawn left side stiff on the track again, lamp adjusted, bedside right. Vanity, perfume bottles, 3, ring dish, 1 gold band, hair clip, phone charger. No bracelet. He sat with that for a moment. No bracelet. He had been in Suite 1401 at 11:40. If Mrs. Harrington had come home at 10:15 wearing the bracelet and set it on the vanity, it should have been there when he arrived an hour and a half later. It wasn't. Which meant one of 2 things. Either she hadn't set it on the vanity, or it wasn't on the vanity when she said it was. He drank his coffee. He thought about George Faulkner. He thought about the 11 minutes he'd spent in the suite, which he could account for to the second. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in 2 years. Celeste Okafor, no relation to the file as it happened, a coincidence of common names, had been a senior adjuster at the same firm where Kwesi had trained. She now worked for a loss assessment consultancy that contracted with 2 of the major hotel chains in Ontario. She picked up on the second ring. "Kwesi Abara," she said. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You heard? Ottawa is small," she said. "The industry is smaller. What do you need?" What he needed, he explained, was someone who knew how to pull the records on a tennis bracelet that had allegedly gone missing under circumstances that didn't quite add up. Not to prove anything yet, to understand the shape of what was missing. Celeste was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been sitting on a voice memo?" she said. "Since last night." She sighed in the way of someone who had known him long enough to find this unsurprising. "I'll make some calls," she said. "Don't talk to anyone else yet." What Celeste found over the next 48 hours came in pieces. The bracelet, a platinum set diamond tennis bracelet, 38 stones, circa 2003, privately insured, had been reported stolen once before, 7 years ago, at a ski lodge in Mont-Tremblant. The claim had been paid out. The bracelet had been listed as unrecovered, but Diane Harrington wore it to dinner at the Harrington Grand 3 weeks after the payout was processed on the evening of a charitable gala, and had been photographed doing so. The photographs existed in the social archives of 2 Ottawa lifestyle publications. The insurance company had apparently not subscribed to either. She made a claim, Celeste said, got paid and kept the bracelet. Kwesi sat with this. "Now she's making another one," he said. "That would be my reading. And she needed someone to have been in the room." A pause. "How long did the keycard log say you were in there?" 11 minutes. "That's a convenient window," Celeste said. "He went back to the hotel that Thursday. Not in uniform, not through the staff entrance, but through the lobby as a visitor, to meet with Mitchell Paré. He brought two things, a printed transcript of the voice memo, time-stamped and dated, and a manila envelope that Celeste had put together. Paré looked at the transcript first. His expression was careful. "This is something you recorded yourself," he said. "A court wouldn't necessarily." "It's metadata verified," Kwesi said. "The timestamp is embedded in the file at the point of recording. It's the same technology your keycard logs use." Paré looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it yet. "What's in there?" "A previous insurance claim for the same bracelet," Kwesi said, "filed 7 years ago, paid out, and photographs of Mrs. Harrington wearing it after the payout was processed." He paused. "I'm not here to threaten anyone, Mr. Paré. I'm here because if this hotel continues down the path it started Monday morning, it's going to end up in the middle of something it doesn't want to be in the middle of." Paré looked at him for a long time. "How long have you worked here?" he said. 6 years. "And you've never mentioned any of this." "The investigator background. It never came up," Kwesi said. "I do housekeeping. I'm good at it." Paré picked up the envelope. The next 72 hours moved quietly. The hotel's legal counsel reviewed the materials Kwesi had provided. Celeste submitted a formal report to the insurance company currently processing Mrs. Harrington's claim. The second company, the one that didn't know about the first payout. A financial crimes investigator from the RCMP was assigned on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Mrs. Harrington had been contacted and asked to come in for a conversation she had not been expecting to have. Kwesi was not present for any of this. He was at home or at the coffee shop 2 blocks from his apartment, or sitting in his car listening to the radio. He had handed over everything that was his to hand over. The rest was not his to carry. Saturday morning, Paré called. "We'd like you to come back to work Monday," he said. "Your leave will be recorded as administrative, no notation of cause." "I'd like a written statement," Kwesi said, "from the hotel, confirming I was not a subject of any investigation." A pause. "I'll have that ready by Monday morning." "Thank you," Kwesi said. He hung up and looked out the window at the street below, wet from a rain that had passed while he was on the phone, the kind of cold gray Ottawa morning that arrived in October and didn't leave until April. A woman pushed a stroller past. A cyclist navigated around a puddle. Ordinary things happening at ordinary speed. Diane Harrington was charged with insurance fraud in November. 1 count for the Mont Tremblant claim. 1 count related to the attempted claim at the Harrington Grand. A 3rd charge was added in January for an earlier claim that the RCMP investigator found while reviewing her file. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea. The case was scheduled for the following spring. She did not return to Suite 1401. The suite was rented to a retired judge from Thunder Bay who preferred his curtains left open and requested no turn-down service. The hotel settled quietly with Kwesi, not in the way of institutions admitting fault, but in the way of institutions choosing to close a file before it became a larger problem. He was offered a role as residential guest services coordinator, a new position, which came with a salary increase and a title that meant he no longer spent his mornings pushing a linen cart. He took it, though he kept the habit of recording his voice memos. Old habits were old habits. Celeste met him for dinner in December, at a Lebanese place on Elgin that he'd been going to for years. They ordered the mixed platter and talked about other things. Her daughter, his mother's new apartment in Scarborough, whether either of them was going to make it to the industry conference in January. They didn't talk about Diane Harrington. At the end of the night, standing outside in coats buttoned to the throat, Celeste said, "You knew as soon as you walked off that elevator, didn't you?" Kwesi thought about it. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I didn't know what shape it was going to take." She nodded. "You should have told them who you were years ago." "I'm the guy who does the linens," he said. "That's not nothing." She looked at him in the particular way of someone who had known him long enough to know when he wasn't quite saying the whole thing. "Get home safe," she said. He walked to his car. The street was quiet. There was a light on in the restaurant window, gold against the dark, and for a moment he stood at his car door and just looked at it. The warmth of it, the ordinary fact of people still inside, still eating, still in the middle of their evenings. Then he got in, started the engine, and drove home. People like Diane Harrington count on something very specific, that the person across from them will be too worried about their job, their reputation, or their safety to push back. They count on the calculation being simple. that it's easier to surrender than to fight, that the cost of resistance is higher than the cost of losing. What they never account for is the person who's done the math already. The person who walked into the room knowing exactly what they'd seen, what they'd recorded, and what it meant. The person who'd been underestimated so many times that being underestimated had stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like an advantage. The bracelet was never stolen. It was never missing. It was simply moved, in the confidence that no one would look too closely at who had been in the room and decide that person was worth believing. That confidence, in the end, was the only thing Diane Harrington had that didn't survive the winter.